Hey guys, I'm Tim Langston with Red Dog Bushcraft, and today let's talk about ferro rods. What are they, and why do you see almost all of your bushcrafters and a lot of people on your survival shows using these as their way to start fire? All right, a little bit of history about ferro rods. The ferro rod was created for the aerospace industry. If you ever watched a rocket take off, the rocket is over top of a pit. And there are large ferro rods sitting on top of grinders, and it throws extremely hot sparks, several thousand degrees, into the pit. The rocket releases the fuel ignites, and the rocket takes off. Since that time, companies like different companies who make lighters, like the big lighter, they put ferro rods as the ignition source to ignite the gas. Most all of your lighters, except for your electronic ones, that's the way they get that initial spark. And the way that occurs is the ferro rod, which is a pyrophoric material cocktail, you might say. There's iron, there's cerium, there's magnesium, there's a mixture of different ingredients that go in them. And most all of the rods have pretty much the same ingredients in them. It's just that some of the rods are harder, some of the rods are softer. Some are large and some are small. And there's differences that we need to recognize to make us successful in utilizing this tool. But to put it in the most basic way, by scraping this rod with a scraper, those particles in this rod are ignited. It's a rapid decomposition that causes that several thousand degree spark. Now remember, it's a spark, not a flame. So we have to have a proper type of tinder to catch this spark to give us a flame. So when you're talking about a ferro rod, tinder becomes very important. That's why we covered tinder earlier than we did the ferro rod. But it is a very reliable source for starting fire because it doesn't care how wet it is, how hot it is, how cold it is, or how much oxygen is in the air, whatever atmosphere you're at, to create that hot spark. Very reliable, and a rod of this size will last. I have no idea how many fires this thing will generate, but it's way more than I've ever been able to use in my 10 years of using ferro rods. As a matter of fact, one that is this size, this one is made by Light My Fire, and it's one that you see a lot of hikers and backpackers utilizing. It's small, but you must remember what the hikers and backpackers are trying to do. They're using a pre-made tinder, or they're collecting very fine natural tinders. But most of the time we're using these to light our propane stoves. And all we need is just the smallest of spark, like that, to ignite that propane stove. There's people that have walked the entire Appalachian Trail, a couple thousand miles, and they start 2 to 3 fires a day, lighting their jet boils and their propane stoves and their alcohol stoves on fire, and they'll only use half of this in that 6-month journey. So very reliable, and that's the reason that people like them so much. Now I mentioned that all ferro rods are not created equal. So when you see the survival shows like Alone, they're going to choose a 5 or a 6 inch by 1/2 inch in diameter rod to start their fires because there's years and years of fires within this rod. Now they come in many different sizes and shapes. Now this one is encased in a aluminum casing, and it has a replaceable ferro rod in it. It screws into the cap, and the cap gives you a nice handle to be able to hold on to when you're utilizing the scraper to start fires with this thing. And it comes with one that is attached. But they have it enclosed because a ferro rod will start to disintegrate over time, especially in a marine environment, especially salt water. It'll start to corrode. It looks almost like acid is beginning to eat it up. That's why when you buy them, they all come with this coating on them. And it's just a light paint, I believe, like a spray paint. And once it's scraped and that coating is removed, that's when you can introduce the elements into it that causes it to start to decompose. So the simple fix to that is to just recoat it once you've utilized it. Now you can do that with a little bit of spray paint, fingernail polish. You can even put a little bit of chapstick or petroleum jelly on it. Anything that keeps the air and the water off of it, and that ferro rod will be good to go for many, many uses. Some ferro rods that come with these plastic handles, the handles will fall off. It happens if you don't have it seated in there and it's not pinned through, these plastic handles will fall off. It's not that big of a deal. Just take a little bit of duct tape and wrap around the end of it to create a handle, and now you have some repair tape, and you have a handle, and you have a fire extender along with it. Yes, duct tape will burn, and that will give you a greater burn time. So don't worry about it if the handles fall off. Now, some companies, they make one for cold conditions, or people who have less dexterity in their hands, and it's encased in this plastic case, permanently fixed in there. Gives you a big handle, comes with a carbide scraper that you can get a good grip on, and gives you a good chance at starting a fire when it's really cold. And in the end, they have a little safe in here where you can put a couple of pre-manufactured fire starters in the back of it that will help accept that spark and give you a flame for a long enough time to overcome marginal tinder that would allow you more success in starting your fires. There's also some of these one-handed. I believe this one is called, let's see, that's the mini spark, and I think this is the spark. But it comes encased in a plastic, and you depress this little lever on the side, which engages a piece of metal that when it's depressed, it will throw sparks down into your tinder. And they make a large size, and then the mini spark, which does the same type thing. If it'll pop out of there for me, like this, and as it's pressed down, the little piece of metal scrapes the rod for you. This is one made by Gerber, came out of the Ultimate Survival Kit, and I had to give it a try. So I got one of those Ultimate Survival Kits endorsed by Bear Grylls. Everybody knows him, great guy. I take nothing away from him. He's a great survival instructor and does a lot with the Scouts. But he put an Ultimate Fire Steel in there. The problem is it doesn't spark. The point of that is you need to check your fire steels when you buy them, because most of the time it's not the fire steel, it's the scraper if you can't get any sparks. Even though they made this one to where it has a bottle opener on it, that's great, but they rounded off the scraper. The scraper needs to have a 90-degree spine, and I really like the back of the saw on my Leatherman Wave because of the amount of material that it will remove from the rod. And that's really what you want to do. You want to scrape it enough to remove enough material that it ignites and goes into your tinder to give you that flame. This is a sharpener made to sharpen scissors. That will work. A piece of a hacksaw blade. This is just a broken sawzall blade, and it once again has a good 90-degree spine on it. That's why you see so many bushcrafters and survival guys, they like their knife, like this Genesis, to have a nice, crisp 90-degree spine on it. Because now they don't have to carry a dedicated scraper along with the ferro rod. They can utilize their knife to remove massive amounts of material from this rod. The more material you remove, the hotter it is, the better your chances of taking that tinder to the point that it can support a flame. Some ferro rods come with a block of aluminum. It's not aluminum, it's magnesium. Magnesium is a very lightweight metal, and you can scrape this down, and these little dinky shavings that come off burn extremely hot. And you'll see me handle a lot of stuff that's on fire, but you will not see me handle anything with magnesium and it is burning, because the temperature of this stuff, it burns white hot, thousands of degrees. Gives you a good chance to get a large enough amount of heat into marginal tinder to give you the amount of heat you need to start a good fire. So let's take a look at how we utilize a couple of different techniques to start tinder on fire utilizing a ferro rod. Now later on, we're going to be using this particular knife right here by Mora. This is the Mora Companion Spark, and it comes with a ferro rod embedded in the handle. So we give it a slight twist and we remove it, and there's our ferro rod. And we can use the back of the spine of this knife, not the cutting edge, but the back of the spine of the knife to remove material to create some sparks. But for your viewing pleasure, I'm going to start off with a large ferro rod, and I'm going to use my Genesis knife that has that 90-degree spine. And we're going to practice a couple of different techniques. One of which is the push method. With the push method, we're going to pin our tinder down to our working surface. Now I'll just take a cotton ball here and process your tinder, because you always process your tinder. And then I'm going to pin that down with the ferro rod. I'm going to take the back of the knife and I'm going to place my thumb on the back of the knife on the flat side of the blade close to the handles. I'm going to angle the knife with the tip slightly down. So this is like a slide on a playground. And I'm not really trying to push down on the slide. I'm trying to push straight down to the stump. But because the rod is strong, it's going to slide down like you're sliding down that playground slide. With the tip being down, the tip will hit first and will prevent my knuckles from slamming down into the stump or causing me to ignite the fire and then the knife landing on top of my tinder and extinguishing it. Remember that fire triangle? We've got our heat here, we've got plenty of air, we've got our fuel, but we've got to make sure that as we come down, we don't extinguish that fire by smothering it out. We combat that by placing our thumb all the way up here at the top so we can get good pressure. Our tip is slightly down, and we push down, throwing hot sparks into the cotton ball and setting it on fire. That is the push method. Okay, next we're going to talk about the pull method. The pull method, we have to anchor something. Last time we anchored the ferro rod into the material. This time we're going to anchor our knife. So I'm placing the butt end of the knife, the end of the handle, down on my working surface, and I'm holding the ferro rod with my finger underneath it. That gives me strength so that the rod doesn't do this as I lift up on it. I want to keep the rod at about a 45-degree angle, and I'm trying to pull up, but because it slides once again, like on that slide, it throws sparks down into my tinder and sets it on fire. One other method that can be utilized if you have tinder that is substandard. Maybe it's a little damp. Maybe it's a little bit more coarse than you want. You don't have these real fine hair-like follicles, and we need to pump a lot of heat into it. We can use the pump method by utilizing the push method, but creating a lot of heat in a small concentrated area by throwing multiple strikes into it. That's the pump method. The problem with the push method or the pump method comes into play when someone has their tinder out in front of them and it's not pinned down and held, and the tip of the knife is not held down. Or you're trying a combination of pushing and pulling at the same time, and when that happens, you hit your tinder and knock it away because you're flailing about. It's never the proper technique. That pump method, if I get on the side, you can watch the tip of the knife hit before my hand or the flat of the knife ever go down on the tinder, because I've got the knife tip extended out way in front of my tinder. My knife tip is hitting and leaving all of this gap as I rain sparks down. So those are the ways that we are going to concentrate as we use our Mora companion to start our cotton balls on fire. Because with this little small ferro rod, and this is really intended to just be an emergency fire starter. This is not intended to be your primary fire starter. But we process our tinder, we anchor our knife, place our finger underneath that little small rod and lift up, showering sparks down on the cotton ball. And even with something this small, we can create enough heat to set that cotton ball on fire. The pull method, once again, finger is underneath the ferro rod, the knife is anchored down, and we lift, raining the sparks into the cotton ball to set it on fire. The pull method, process our tinder, push method this time. Pinning our tinder down, knife tip is slightly down, my hand is up so I'm not going to bang it into the stump, and I push down, raining the sparks into the cotton ball and setting them on fire. One last time, the pump method, we pin our tinder down and we throw multiple sparks down into our tinder to set it on fire. Push, pull, or pump. You've got to pick one. Trying to do them all together will only lead you to disaster as far as knocking your tinder and your kindling out of place. Now, just like we scraped that ferro rod, we can utilize one of these mag blocks or magnesium blocks to create fire, because it has a ferro rod on one side and it has this magnesium block that we can utilize the scraper, either the back of our knife or the one that is included with the kit, and we can create a little pile of these shavings. Now, how much of a pile do you need? Because it's a lot of work to sit here and scrape this thing. And you notice I'm making my work a little bit easier because I'm rotating this block back and forth as I scrape down. That's giving me a little, it creates a little ridge, and then I'm taking the ridge off, and that creates another ridge, and then I'm taking that ridge off, and that creates another ridge, and then I shave that ridge off. So instead of working on trying to scrape this whole thing flat like this, I get on the corner and create these little curls. But how much do I need? Well, the instructions on the block say you need a nickel-sized pile of it. So you remove about as much as a nickel is round, and then we put this all together. The reason people don't like magnesium blocks is because this magnesium is very light, and the slightest of a breeze will blow it away. And you really have to have your tinder processed and have it real close by so that when this ignites, you can move it in. I'm not going to do that right now because I want you to see how fast this burns up. Now, once again, I'm using the push technique, but the back of the block is right in front of my magnesium, but I'm keeping my hands up here so I don't knock this stuff. If this blows away, or if you knock it, you got to start all over again because it'll scatter and it's almost impossible to gather back up. Look at how hot that burns. Extremely hot. Gives you a couple of seconds of time to ignite that fine tinder. So let's move that out of the way, and we'll utilize our knife this time, and we'll scrape a little bit of this magnesium down. Notice I'm using the knife, scraping the magnesium just like I use when I'm utilizing the back of that 90-degree spine to strike the ferro rod. Utilizing the back of the spine of the knife instead of the cutting side of your knife greatly saves the edge that you need for cutting. A knife is like anything else. We have to worry about conservation of our resources, and we don't want to prematurely dull our knife. This time we'll move our tinder over. We'll utilize that same technique with our thumb over the back of the 90-degree spine, push a spark down, move our tinder in, and once again create that fire that we need. So let's recap. We'll pull that out with the knife. Like I said, I don't like to touch that. And let's go back to our large knife and our large ferro rod. Hand position, gripping the knife, not the cutting edge, but the back of the 90-degree spine, placing our thumb on the flat side of the knife. The rod is at a 45-degree angle. The knife tip is slightly down so I don't smash my tinder. And then I push and rain sparks down. That's the push method. Pull method. Finger goes under the ferro rod. The knife is firmly in place. And pull back, raining sparks down on our cutting area. And then finally, that pump method to where we set and throw multiple sparks down into our sub or our marginal tinder to create fire. That's a soft rod. This little small one that I showed you that backpackers like to utilize is a very hard rod. And if you have a hard rod, you have a tendency not to be able to remove as much material. You get a smaller spark. But that can come in handy if you use a fourth technique, which is just a push. So I'm taking my thumb and I'm putting it on the back of my scraper and I'm just flicking it a little bit to remove a little bit of material off the very end of the ferro rod. Still enough to set good tinder on fire. Now you may wonder about how stable this thing is. It burns, right? But it's not like it's going to burn if it's exposed to open flame for a short amount of time. Now, if you were to put this in your campfire, eventually it would start to burn and would be almost impossible to put out. But for a short amount of time, it's stable. And that is the great thing about a ferro rod. Very safe, very efficient way of getting a spark. Now, just a word about the little scrapers that come with these Light My Fires. It has a divot in the side for your thumb. If you turn that around and you don't utilize that divot, you cannot create a spark. They were smart enough that they created a burr that when you're right-handed, your thumb fits in it. But when you're left-handed, your thumb also fits in it, but now the burr is on the other side. So it depends on which way you hold the scraper and which hand you're utilizing it, that it works best to remove the material. So let's say you buy a ferro rod and it doesn't have a scraper or a handle. Once again, I just add some duct tape. I like Gorilla brand, and I just wrap it around the end, and now I have my tape to utilize and something to hold on to. Now, you don't always have to use a knife or a scraper that comes with these things, and there's many different ones that come with them. Some look like this. I showed you the one from Light My Fire with the little thumb groove in it. Showed you the one from Bear Grylls, but it does not have that sharpened spine. One of the best sharp spines is on a saw. The two I like the best, my favorite, is on the Leatherman Wave. But if you have a pocket knife like the small Swiss Army knife, this is more of your everyday carry type cutting tool. You can still utilize the back of that saw blade. The problem is when you start to press, that blade could close, and this thing is just razor sharp and it could do damage to your hand. So you need to stay down here at the bottom and utilize it in a push method, not pushing down. Makes it a little bit more difficult. But if you take just a stick and place it over top of the saw blade, now you can press down and get good hot sparks and not have to worry about that blade closing on your hands. That's another reason I like the Leatherman, because the saw actually has a lock on it, just like a lock back on a knife blade. But it can be utilized and it makes a fantastic scraper. If you're having trouble getting sparks off of your ferro rod, check your scraper. It's probably the scraper. That's the reason, once again, that most survival guys and bushcrafters like the 90-degree spine on the back of their knife. You have to test your knife to see. Some have a 90-degree spine, most don't. Most, they round that over so that it's more comfortable on the back of your thumb if you're pushing on the back of the spine of the knife. Now, something that's going to send a cringe into the knife community is talking about using the cutting side of your blade. Yes, it will work because it is at a 90 degree at a very fine micro bevel down here at the end. And you can utilize the cutting edge of most knives to scrape your ferro rod. But if you're going to do that, use the very bottom of your knife down here. The one that's the side that's closest to the handle. Right here, close to that little squared off point. That's an area of your knife that you don't use for cutting as much. And you can, once again, remove good material with your knife, even if it doesn't have a 90 degree spine. If it's enough of an emergency that you need a fire, I'll worry about sharpening this knife when I get home. I've got plenty of knives and I know how to sharpen them. If you don't, you can take it somewhere and have it sharpened, but it's no excuse not to have fire if you have a ferro rod. So, ferro rods, yes, I carry one just about every day. It stays attached to my multi-tool, and that's where it rides all the time. And I have one in all of my kits when I travel out. Many of my knives, they have a ferro rod attached to the sheath because it's my go-to method of starting fire. But with that, you really need a good, well-processed tinder. And I prefer the man-made tinders when it comes to that. Something that is manufactured for the purpose of starting a fire. And that's where I rely on things like Wet Fire, the Weber fire cubes, or the Mini Infernos. Get a long burn time, they accept the spark very easily and give you a long enough burn time that you should certainly be able to overcome even that marginal tinder. All right, guys, that's just a quick look at ferro rods and several different techniques that you can utilize. It all comes down to practice though. I always recommend that when someone buys a ferro rod, buy two of them. You buy one and you practice with it. You utilize that to start your campfires, light your grills, start firing the fireplace, use it when you're out with the family, enjoying the great outdoors. Use fire responsibly and keep that other one, that emergency ferro rod, in your emergency kit so that if anything ever happens, you're at least guaranteed to have a good hot spark to start your fire in any situation. All right, thanks for joining me for this one. I'm Tim Langston with Red Dog Bushcraft, home of global safety and survival. Until next time, God bless.